Yeah, so this is a great question, which is basically what are we going to do in the clinic on Wednesday? And I think to answer that question, we have to put this into context with the STAMPEDE findings. So everyone knows that STAMPEDE showed a benefit to the addition of abiraterone for those patients who qualified for their trial, who met the STAMPEDE very high risk criteria. And I think that our results really complement the STAMPEDE results. So if you look at our results for the clinically node-positive patients, the hazard ratio is basically almost exactly the same as STAMPEDE's. So our hazard ratio for enzalutamide for clinical node-positive was 0.43. The STAMPEDE hazard ratio for clinical node-positive was 0.49. So very similar, but we didn't show a benefit really for the other patients. So what's the difference? Well, I think the difference is that overall we enrolled lower risk patients than the STAMPEDE population did. So if you look at STAMPEDE, they had 39% node positive. We had 11% node positive. STAMPEDE had a median PSA of 35. We had a median PSA of 14. STAMPEDE had 92% with clinical T3, T4. We had 47% with clinical T3, T4. So this is just a different, it's a lower risk group of patients. They're all high risk, but a different risk group. Now, we did an exploratory analysis that looked at by the STAMPEDE eligibility. And we found that, okay, if you were clinically node positive, then as we said, there was a benefit, hazard ratio 0.43. But if you were in the ENZARAD trial, clinically node negative, but you would have qualified for STAMPEDE, there really wasn't a strong effect. The hazard ratio was 0.85, very similar to the overall hazard ratio for the trial of 0.88, and it crossed 1. And then if you were clinically node negative and didn't qualify for STAMPEDE, there was no benefit. So how do I put this into practice? What am I going to do in clinic on Wednesday? What I think is, obviously for clinical node positive, we should be adding an ARPI. I think for those patients who meet the STAMPEDE very high risk criteria, but who also look like the patients who were enrolled on the STAMPEDE trial, I think you should add an ARPI. But remember, these patients, these had a median PSA of 35. Those patients, go ahead. But I don't think that all the patients that met the STAMPEDE criteria necessarily have to get an ARPI, because we had plenty of patients who met STAMPEDE who didn't benefit from the ARPI. So I think if you look more like an ENZARAD patient, if your median PSA was 14, then even if you meet STAMPEDE criteria, I think it's not clear that you really need something. And then obviously for those who don't meet STAMPEDE criteria, radiation and 2 years of hormones are the way to go.